Do you ever feel not good enough? Do you ever feel like you're falling short, that things that are happening are above your pay grade? When I was first in seminary, I thought I'd be a hospital chaplain, partly because I'd been pre-med biology, but also I was afraid to preach and couldn't imagine ever doing that. I felt way inadequate. And I'll tell you, there are ways every Sunday that I still struggle with that. And I also think, though, this past week, bring it into present day, there are people who told me about things where I felt, oh my gosh, what do I do? Where I heard that a large part of the student body of Keeling Elementary School, where we tutor, was missing because the parents are afraid to let their children come to school. I heard from a person who's on the board for Tihan, who is afraid that the funding for his AIDS medication will be gone. I talked to someone who is a professor at the University of Arizona who's also transgender. The research funding's already gone, and he said, I'm being erased from the websites. All of that feels way above my pay grade. There are other times, though, where I think, I know what's best. You ever feel that way? Where you think you might be the smartest person in the room, and everyone just did it your way, everything's going to be all right. Well, wherever we fall on the spectrum that I'm describing, and I imagine it might depend on the day or the situation, imagine Jesus of Nazareth, first century rabbi, imagine yourself in that setting, comes to you and says, come, follow me. And furthermore, keep in mind that when a first century rabbi says to you, come, follow me, they are indicating that they believe that you can know what they know and do what they do. So when Jesus says, come, follow me, he's saying, I believe that you can be like me. For real. How would you feel in terms of your confidence level about that? And I'm asking that, I remember earlier on in ministry, I was new in a particular church, and I was operating under a basic kind of theological premise that the church is the body of Christ, and the people in the church are disciples of Jesus Christ. And so from that premise, I was just talking with the leadership team of the church and asking, reflecting, it was a way to get to know each other. I asked, when did you have the experience or understanding that you were a disciple of Jesus? Was it all your life, you've just been nourished in this and that's what you know? Or was there a time where you were intentional, or you said, yes, I'm a disciple of Jesus? And then there was that awkward quiet. And I had, though, already learned it's all right to sit in the awkward quiet for a little bit. And then one of the persons confessed, and he called it, I have a confession. I think I'm still waiting. And his perspective, he said, I think the disciples of Jesus are super religious and spiritual, and I'm not. And that's above my pay grade. And I'm lifting that up because there are two people that if we've been part of church traditions, we've heard of, Isaiah and Peter. And there's sometimes, if you were looking at a children's storybook around Christian ideals, they might be called the heroes of the Bible, people who did amazing things. But we hear their own struggle with whether they're good enough to be part of what God's doing. The Isaiah passage, it comes from a time that's just preceding a horrible disaster in the southern kingdom of Judah, where the Babylonian Empire will invade, destroy cities, destroy the city of Jerusalem, burn the temple to the ground, kill lots of people, send other people into exile. And the time that this passage comes from precedes that, but there's already huge national instability. There is corruption at all levels. People are being further marginalized, rich getting richer, poor getting poorer. And Isaiah has been listening for how God is still speaking and claimed this role that he's supposed to share what he hears with the people, whether it's hard or easy. And so he's already living into that in this time of great instability. And he goes into the temple and he's praying, meditating in the temple, and he has a vision that you heard about in the reading. And his vision in the temple is connecting with the idea of God being so much greater than Isaiah had ever imagined. And the way that's described is just the train of God's robe fills the whole of the temple, which was considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. It's the biggest building anyone there had ever seen. And it's just the train of God's robe fills the temple. Well, how great and glorious is God? And Isaiah's response to this is, woe is me, or doomsday, doomsday. Oh, no. I am unworthy of this. It says, I'm a man of unclean lips in one translation. I come from a people of unclean lips. And the Message version is giving us some interpretation and helpful understanding about this. He's saying, look, I'm a mess. And I come from a people who are a mess. I'm not worthy of all this goodness and greatness. And I really appreciate that Isaiah names it. Because Isaiah could have said in the place of discomfort, I'm going to shut this down. Let's wrap up this prayer meditation time. I wonder if the Super Bowl's started yet. There's my one Super Bowl reference for those who needed that today. Or in our modern time, like scroll what's happening on Facebook. Let's turn on the TV. Let's stream a show. Let's get busy with a project, right? When we're in that place of discomfort or if we feel unworthy, an easy thing to do is shut it down and just kind of shove it aside and try to move on. But Isaiah, he names it, I feel inadequate, I feel unworthy, which then opens him to the opportunity of how God is still speaking. And there's a messenger of God that comes, and the whole scene of the coal and the lips is a picture of you may feel unworthy, but in God's presence you are worthy. I heal you, I help you be whole, I help you be who you're meant to be. And a similar idea is at work in the story from our gospel reading. In Luke's version of events, what we think of as the 12 apostles, they've not yet been called to be disciples. And so Jesus, though, has other people following him around, crowds following him around. He's in the flow of his ministry. And the scene is, there's this guy named Simon Peter. So I'll just call him Peter because that's how most of us know him, Simon Peter. And Peter has fished all night and didn't catch a thing. Any of you fisher people gone out and didn't catch a thing? Right. So then, though, there's metaphor here. There's always metaphor here. Have you ever worked hard at something and it felt like it came to nothing? You gave it your all, you put in the effort, maybe you did it for years, and then you get to this place like, what was all that for? And I wonder if that's part of the story here, to tap into that. So it's been a really hard night for Peter. And I also imagine then, fished all night, what do you suppose he wants to do as he brings the boat ashore? Go to sleep, right? I'm done with this. And just at that moment, here comes Jesus with now the ubiquitous crowd following him around, and Jesus got into one of his boats. I mean, there's a ridiculousness of the situation. Like you're you're washing out the nets, like, oh, I can't wait for the nap. I wonder if there's food at home, that kind of thing. And then you turn around and there's the rabbi and says, could you push this out a little further? I'd like to continue my teaching. And he's going to take advantage of the superior acoustics along the lakeshore. If you've ever been on an inland lake, you likely have noticed this. I remember we would go to one in northern Michigan, and we could hear people in a cabin halfway around the lake having normal conversation, which reminded us to watch what we said. So, I don't know what Peter's thinking, but we hear that he does it. And I'm going to lift up, that can be surprising because we know there's a part of Peter's personality where he thinks he's the smartest person in the room, where he can be full of himself. So whatever's going on, he still says yes. And they push the boat out, and Jesus is teaching. Now, Luke doesn't tell us a single thing about what Jesus is teaching in this particular moment. And likely that's because throughout the gospel, we get lots of pictures of what Jesus is teaching. And Jesus is very much on message. So the odds are he's teaching things about the reign of God, the way that God's mercy, justice, love is at hand, Jesus talked about. He talked about people connecting with the greatest command of their faith tradition, that they are to love God with their whole being, that you focus on that. That's your first place. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And he taught people that from that flow of love with God, you have what you need to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said the neighbor is also the stranger and the refugee and even your enemy. And he talked about to do all this, you can be immersed in God's Spirit or baptized in God's Spirit. God's Spirit, you're not doing it on your own. It's not a marching list of morality. God's Spirit empowers you to do this work. So likely, and he's giving stories and parables like he always did, but those are some of the things that Peter's likely hearing with a front row seat. And then Jesus wraps it up. And I imagine if I'm Peter, I'm like, okay, well, that was interesting. All right, finally, time for bed. And what does Jesus say? Push the boat out even further for a catch. Now, what's this son of a carpenter telling me, a fisher person, who fished all night and it didn't work then, the best time to fish? What's he thinking? And I imagine this might have run through Peter's head. And Peter, we've seen the character of Peter. He might have said something like that, but he doesn't here. And what I wonder is it because he's hit a kind of bottom that night? He's worked hard. It feels like all the old ways he's known aren't working. There's a sense of helplessness, so, well, what the heck? He does let Jesus know, that's the tiniest protest. Well, I did fish all night, but if you say so. And then Peter lowers the nets, and we hear that there's so many fish, an inconceivable number of fish, that it starts to swamp the boat. They call for the help. The second boat comes in. They're hauling it in, and there's a sense of, in the story, it's a picture of God's abundance or greatness symbolized in the fish. And Peter's response is a lot like Isaiah's. Peter's response is not like, well, I deserve this. His response is, go away from me. I'm a sinful man. He feels inadequate, unworthy. So all that bluster that we sometimes see in Peter, what's beneath that surface is the sense of maybe I'm not good enough, and that's why I need to show up like I got all the answers. But like with Isaiah, because he names it instead of shoving it down, he gets to hear a response. And Jesus says, don't be afraid. He knows that Peter is afraid. And he doesn't need to live his fear. He does not need to be his fear. So in other words, Peter, all of this for you. It's for you. You are worthy. The fullness of God's presence, abundance, love, life, energy, it's for you, Peter, and not just for you. Bigger than that, better than that, Peter, you're going to take it to other people. I will make you fish for people. And it's very much like in the Isaiah story. Isaiah, this fullness of God isn't just for you. You are to carry it to other people. You are going to help other people know the fullness of love and justice, mercy and healing. And Isaiah says, here I am, Lord. Send me. And I'm struck by these stories paired in our lectionary readings today because I think they can speak to us no matter who we are or where we are on the journey. That sometimes we feel inadequate. We feel like we're not worthy, that we can't be part of what God's doing, that whatever's happening is above our pay grade. And this is a story that speaks to us, that says all of it's for you. And this fullness, this love, this healing can actually be at work in and through you. As a story that also can speak to us when we are full of ourselves, a reminder that that could get in the way. And we might be full of ourselves because we're covering up our sense of inadequacies or where we fall short, and that we can make room for God's fullness, healing, wholeness, and that we can be part of God's fullness, healing, and wholeness. One of the other things I also think of, and I was helped in this by Marianne Williamson, who talks about that maybe our fear beneath those other fears, maybe we're afraid of how powerful we are. Maybe we're afraid that if we actually identified as the beloved children of God, created in the image of God, well, we might have some responsibility. And we're afraid of that. I'm going to read a little excerpt from her book, A Return to Love. This is Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. We are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us. It is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we're liberated from our own fear, our presence liberates others. And I was remembering this past week, I won't get into the whole story, although I would love to, and I've told pieces of it here and there, but after September 11th, 2001, there are people in the city where I was serving in a church who had just taken part in a Gospel Music Workshop of America workshop at an African-American church. And they started talking together, the people who are part of this series, about in the face of what had just happened, this face of national tragedy, this face of responses with violence and chaos and confusion. And remember how we were still afraid when we hit the next Super Bowl? Will this be the next, every single big event? We were afraid that it would be the next horrific attack. And there were people talking about, well, what can we do in the midst of this? And there was this understanding of, well, what might bring people together? What might people be doing if we can at least get each other in the same room? And so, longer story, but what was born was the Community Connects Choir. There were two directors, a black gospel musician who came out from Detroit to direct once a week, and someone who taught at Interlochen School for the Performing Arts and was directing us using sacred choral music. And it was the most diverse group of humans I've ever been part of. It was 150 voices, black, white, Latino, people from, and the diversity in a community. We had Lutheran Church, ELCA, and Missouri Synod. There were Unitarians and Pentecostals. There were United Methodists and AME Zion, all together. And my church building was one of the largest in the city, and so they rehearsed there. 150 voices gathering for this. And about 3 weeks in, after the rehearsal, a woman had come up to me, and she said, Pastor Michael, I want you to meet my grandmother. This was her first night here. And I said, good to meet you. And she said, oh, my granddaughter is an angel, and I always listen to angels. And I knew there was a story. She said, I'm in assisted living. I can't get out. I can't drive. I'm 94 years old. And I said out loud to her sometimes thoughts that are in my head the last time she was visiting me this past week. And I told her, I don't know what I'm here for. I don't know what I'm good for. Everything's falling apart. What can I possibly do? And she said, my angel granddaughter. She said, I'll let you tell it, honey. And the granddaughter, who's probably in her 50s, 40s or 50s, she said, well, I said, Grandma, you inspire me every day. I need your stories. We need your stories. We need your voice, your experience. And you might need to sing, because your heart comes alive when you sing. And she told her about the choir and said, I'll drive you to the rehearsal. And so this grandmother, 94 years old, had been at her first rehearsal, and she said to me, like I tell you, I always listen to the voice of angels. And I got to sing with the angels tonight. And she said, so I'm always glad every time in my life when God calls, and then she swept her arm over the sea of faces, said, I say, here I am, Lord. Here I am.